Well may.
Mr Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr Temporary Speaker. I rise on behalf of the Greens to address the Water Management Amendment Bill. Mr Temporary Speaker, this bill is important. Finding a balance between the productive uses of water and sustainability is important. In fact, I would argue that it is critical that we get this balance right. And of course, you'll know that our concern in the past has been that this balance has not been correct, and the so-called productive uses have actually undermined the long-term economic sustainability by reducing the capacity of the environment to respond by the harvesting of too much water. I wanted to really focus on some questions that I have around the bill. I understand that it might not be possible for the Minister to respond to all of the issues. Of course, with the support of the government and the opposition, the bill will pass, but it would be useful if, when the matter goes to the upper house, that we can have a discussion about some of these issues. Firstly, Mr Temporary Speaker, is the ignoring of the Millennium Drought and climate change by basing the high security decisions on pre-2004 data only. My understanding is that the legislation changes all of the state's water sharing plans, so the decisions about high security water retentions are based on, quote, historical flow of information held by the department when this plan commenced, end quote, rather than, quote, flow information held by the New South Wales Office of Water. Clause 38 1B is a provision, quote, omit, quote, worst period of inflows into this water source as represented in flow information held by the New South Wales Office of Water, and insert worst period of low inflows in this water source based on historical flow information held by the department when this plan's commenced. So the inquiry, Mr Temporary Speaker, is that, as you know, high security water licences are guaranteed it's like 98% availability, and in order to do this, the Office of Water has to keep several years' worth of water in dams to ensure there is enough water to meet the high security needs in the worst period of inflows. So I understand that what this change effectively means, and instead of basing the decision on how much to keep on the most up-to-date available information, the decision will be based on the data when the plan commenced in 2004. And doing this means that the data from the Millennium Drought and future data will not be considered. We know that climate change will see more frequent and more intense droughts, and despite the fact that a large proportion of New South Wales is still in drought. It's especially concerning because the second half of the 20th century was unusually wet. So, Mr Temporary, my question goes to this issue of the data that will be used. In the second read speech, the Minister talked about regulated river water sharing plans currently requiring water to be set aside within a dam to ensure full on-year water allocations for high security licences. The water sharing rule was developed prior to the recent Millennium Drought. When the Millennium Drought is taken into account, implementation or implementing this current water sharing plan rule would result in significant quantities of water being taken out of production and held in reserve in a case of equally severe drought occurs. Modelling indicates that existing rule could reduce general security licence allocations by 8% on average, up to 20% over in some years, end quote. So the issue here obviously will be important in the Murrumbidgee, where high security licences are around 20% of entitlements, and probably less of an issue in the Lachlan and Murray, where they make up around 5 to 10%. So is it the fact that the government is arguing that the removal of the Millennium Drought and future conditions from the decision process will have net economic benefits, as there will be less water held in storage and more available for the use of GC licence holders? Obviously the challenge, when you look at the kind of logic behind that, is that water trades about $20 to $60 a megalitre in normal years, and the price has risen up to about $1,000 in drought years. So it indicates that droughts would need to be about 20 years apart to seem to make this economic prediction work. So I wanted to ask Mr Temporary Speaker, has the government done modelling on the impact of the removing of the Millennium Drought from their modelling for high security licence requirements? An associated issue, of course, is compensation payable under the Act when water is taken from high security and given to general security. A licence holder could potentially be seeking compensation. If that's the case, what's the process for that? Are they confident that based on 100 years of climate data pre-2004, we have an understanding of what the future climate will be and that these plans will take that into account? If climate change models are correct and we will have drier climate with more frequent and intense droughts, will these plans need to be refined in the future? Does the government expect any applications for compensation from high security licence holders based on this change? And if there is compensation, who's liable for that compensation? The second issue, Mr Temporary Speaker, and I'll try and be very brief, is the issue of compensation provided for supplementary water licence holders. Now, the legislation allows for compensation to be paid for reductions in water allocations to supplementary water licences, Schedule 1 amends the Principal Act. Now, I understand that historically it's not been the case that supplementary licences that it's really been about making economic use, that it has been about making economic use of excess water availability. It hasn't been a guarantee that that water would be available, and the idea over time, I understand, is if conditions got significantly drier, these provisions could be phased out. But this amendment locks a future government into compensating these licence holders. So I really think it's not clear in the second read speech why the government has decided to allow compensation to be payable to supplementary water licence holders, when I understand this was never the intention when the licences were originally granted. So will the state be liable for compensation if a future government decides to divert greater flows, for example, to the environment? That's a question I think needs answering. And, for example, will the federal government be liable for compensation if a future government decides to divert greater flows to the environment? Because if, as climate change models predict, we have a drier climate with more frequent and intense droughts, will this mean that a significant reassessment of licences is required if these models come to life? And so will the state then be liable for compensation to supplementary licence holders? Yeah. Mr Temporary Speaker, the final point that I'd like to make is just around creating flood licences and allowing them to be compensatable. The bill creates a new category of floodplain harvesting licence and allows the conversion of existing floodplain usage into these licences and allows them to be compensatable. This means that an entirely new liability for the state in terms of compensation will be created by this bill, and it also means that flood works that were developed after the 1994 cap on new works, that's illegal works, will be legalised and potentially compensated for. So this may have significant ramifications for downstream users and also rewards inefficient or illegal diversions, and of course 57A relates to that. So, Mr Temporary Speaker, I ask genuinely, will floodplain harvesting licences be granted to people who have illegally built flood works after the 1994 cap on new works? And what's the economic value of water access that will be provided to the owners of floodplain works that were developed after the announcement of the 1994 cap on development? Has the government got an idea of how many new licences will be issued? I think that's an important question. How many new licences do we think will be issued in this situation? And what will the impact of these licences be on sustainable diversion limits? And of course, as we heard from the member for Charlestown, what's the impact? One of the previous members speaking, what will the implications be for downstream users? Of course, the final point, Mr Temporary Speaker, is will inefficient diversion works be rewarded under this change by being issued with a licence which they can then trade or seek compensation if it's removed? Mr Temporary Speaker, it's an important piece of legislation. I acknowledge that the government has put a lot of effort in. If you read the second read speech from the Minister, there's been a lot of consultation with irrigators and others. I understand that it may not be possible to answer all of these questions in the Minister's second read speech, at this stage, but it's important that we get this right. And it's not only for farming communities, it's also for the broader community, that we strike the right balance to make sure that we fully understand all of these issues. So, Mr Temporary Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to ask these questions, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, I apologise. I've been calling Mr Temporary Speaker. It's been a busy day.
I thought you might know something that I don't.
Haven't you heard?
Well, yeah, that's right. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I apologise. Mr Deputy Speaker, the bill has involved a lot of work, obviously a lot of consultation. I think there are questions that we would like to ask, and I'm not proposing that the Minister answer every single question now if the bill is proposing to proceed through all the stages today. But it is important that some of these questions, some of the detail about modelling, about some of the ideas the government have, are done correctly, because the last thing we want to do is have ourselves coming back here in a year or 2 years or 5 years, or if the climate change models are predicted are correct in 25 years, having to shell out significant compensation. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.